In this lecture, we're going to take a look at how the digestive tract, the alimentary canal, does its movements in order to both mix and mechanically digest and to propel foods along the tract, and then begin looking at the locations along the tract, looking at the structures and functions of specific regions of the alimentary canal. So mixing movements are movements that will mix and blend the food or that we've consumed with all of the digestive juices. It's always a little distressing to imagine the secretions of the digestive tract as juices, but we'll go with it. Segmentation is a form of mixing movement that pushes the food together and then pushes it apart, pushes together, pushes it apart in order to blend it. And we see segmentation occurring here in the stomach as we squeeze first here and here, so that pushes this food together, and then we squeeze in the opposite location here and here, separating the food from each other. And this drawing here really helps to illustrate it nicely. So if you imagine some yellow food and some blue food in a section of the intestine, if we squish them apart, like we're doing here in the second one, and then back together again, and then apart, and then together again, what we'll see is blending over time as the food is squeezed apart and pushed together. And this blending is happening in this segment here, and it's also happening next door in this segment and this, so this segmentation has segments of the alimentary canal contracting, relaxing, contracting, relaxing, contracting, relaxing, causing that segment to become very mixed with the materials in the neighboring segments. Propelling movements, peristalsis being the primary propelling movement, is a wave of alternating longitudinal and circular muscle contraction that helps to push the food along the digestive tract. So if the segmentation movements are primarily the circular muscle doing the contracting work alternatingly, with peristalsis, first we see a contraction that prevents food from traveling backward, and then we see the longitudinal muscles contracting backward, which helps to push the food along, and then as the longitudinal muscles are relaxing, this segment of the digestive tract will contract, and that will then force the food forward. So it is this repeated alternation of longitudinal muscle or circular muscle contracting, longitudinal muscle pulling backward around the food, and then a new section, the next section of circular muscle contracting again, that helps to push the food further down the pipe. So peristalsis and segmentation are the primary mixing movements that we see mixing and propelling movements that we see in the digestive system. So how do we control all that muscle? Well, as we've said before, it's under autonomic control. Sympathetic control tends to reduce the segmentation and peristaltic activity, but it stimulates the contraction of what are known as sphincter muscles. So a good location to imagine a sphincter muscle is here, where we got two that are associated with the stomach. So we have circular muscle that wraps around the entrance of the esophagus into the stomach. That's called the lower esophageal sphincter. And we have another one here at the distal end of the stomach called the pyloric sphincter. And these are circular muscles that are smooth muscle, generally, that wrap around the tube, and when they contract, they can fully close the alimentary canal off. And so fight or flight stimulation, sympathetic control, when we stimulate these sphincter muscles, they contract. So sympathetic stimulation will reduce mixing and movement, mixing and propulsive movements of the alimentary canal, but it will stimulate this contraction of sphincter muscles. Parasympathetic, and the purpose of that is to stop any digestive activity and to hold the food in whatever region it's found in, so that we're not moving it forward. So the closure of those sphincter muscles prevents food from moving along the alimentary canal. Under rest and digest stimulation, though, we see increase in propulsive and mixing movements, and increase in stimulation of the secretion of the digestive tract. So we see lots and lots of activity under parasympathetic stimulation. From the mouth all the way down to the first half of the large intestine, we see the vagus nerve stimulating or providing this parasympathetic control. The far half, the distal portion of the large intestine, all the way to the anus, is innervated by nerves that come from the sacral region of the spinal cord. So the bulk of parasympathetic stimulation is delivered along the vagus nerve. Okay, so let's take a look at the regions, at the structures and the function of different regions of the alimentary canal, and we'll begin at the mouth. The oral cavity is the region inside the teeth. So surrounded by the teeth, that's the oral cavity. The vestibule is everything between the teeth, or that space between the teeth and the cheeks. The oral cavity, so now we're talking about the tongue, the palate, the line, and the vestibule are both lined with a always moist, non-keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. So that means that because it's non-keratinized, the cells at the very surface are still alive. And if you recall, we scraped some of those cells from our cheeks and looked at them under the microscope back when we were starting the cells. And so those were still living cells that we looked at. The function of the mouth is to receive the food and start the processes of mechanical digestion as we masticate the food. That's chewing and macerating the food into small bits. And that requires the use of the teeth, of course, but also the tongue and the roof of the mouth, the palate, as we move the food around so that we can get to the still unmasticated chunks and get it really small. While we are chewing, we also have a lot of secretion coming from the salivary glands, both enzymatic secretion and mucus secretions. And salivary enzymes, and we'll look at those in a second, the salivary enzymes will initiate chemical digestion. The salivary enzymes can only digest carbohydrates, so we begin to chop up large carbohydrates into smaller individual monosaccharides. The tongue is busy sensing the food, analyzing it, determining whether this is something that we want to bring into the body. Is the consistency proper? Is the taste appropriate? Is it the right temperature? Those are all things that the tongue is determining, and other locations of the mouth are determining for us. And we talked about gustation back in the nervous system chapters. So if you need to review that, I'm not going to be testing you on it, but if you want to review it, that's where you would find that information. The cheeks are the lateral walls of the mouth, again lined with that stratified squamous epithelium that's a mucous membrane. And the lips, they are formed by skeletal muscle, and in that muscle there's a lot of sensory receptors and blood vessels. So let's look at the tongue itself. It is a skeletal muscle covered by a mucous membrane. The bumps on our tongue are the papillae. Back before I started teaching this class, I always imagined that those bumps were taste buds. They are not. They are little projections on the surface of the tongue. They roughen the surface, helps us to move food around. And on the sides of, so if these are papillae here, it's on the sides of the papillae that we find the little taste buds with their little tasting cells inside of them. It is anchored at the base by the hyoid bone found there in the throat. And if you if you hold your tongue, try to touch your the roof of your mouth with your tongue while your mouth is open, you can feel underneath there's a little membrane that anchors or connects the tongue down to the floor of the mouth by what's called the lingual frenulum. So lingual means tongue. We've got two terms that mean tongue: lingual and glossal. One's Greek, one's Latin. I'm not sure which is which. I suspect Greek and Latin, but I'm not positive about that. If you close your mouth, hold your teeth together, notice that when relaxed, the tongue nearly fills that oral cavity. There's not a lot of space around the tongue, so it's just the right size. And when you look way to the posterior portion of the tongue, you can see that they are covered with lymphoid nodules called the lingual tonsils because they're on the tongue. Okay, now let's look at the roof of the mouth, which is referred to as the palate. There is a very hard region of the palate, that is the hard palate. It is underlaid by bone, by the palatine bone, and by the palatine processes that interdigitate with the palatine bone. Palatine processes are part of the maxilla, the upper jaw bone. And as we're chewing, the tongue will force the food against the hard palate. Back at the posterior side, and you can check this with your own tongue again, is the soft palate. It's muscular, and it includes this dangly down thing that's there at the back of the throat called the uvula. It's covered on the posterior and lateral surfaces by the palatine tonsils. So the palatine tonsils are found here. These are the ones that swell up really large when we have tonsillitis. And then way back in the pharynx, kind of up and above, are the adenoids. That's also known as the pharyngeal tonsils. And they're above the soft palate, way back on the posterior wall of the pharynx, and slightly, right there where the nasopharynx meets the pharynx. Okay, so hard palate and soft palate with the uvula there in the back. Teeth are, of course, a very important part of the mouth. They develop in sockets in the alveolar processes of both the mandible and the maxilla. And there are two sets of them. You can see here that this child, maybe these are already the adult teeth coming down, but you can see up here that we've got an adult tooth waiting to erupt. So as it grows and begins to descend, notice the location. It's almost, it's up by the hard, that's not the nostril, that's up where the nasal bone is. So if you touch your own nose, you can see how high up in the jaw, in this child's jaw, that bone is waiting there. As it grows and descends, it will push out these two teeth, so they will get nudged out of the way, and that's when those deciduous teeth fall out. So we talk about them as either primary teeth, primary because they're the first set that comes in, or deciduous teeth. Deciduous trees are the trees that lose their leaves. Deciduous teeth are the teeth that we lose. and they erupt through the gums, also called the gingiva. You've probably heard the term gingivitis. That's inflammation of the gums, the gingiva. We have 20 primary teeth, and they begin to erupt around 6 months, and most children have all of their primary teeth, all 20, by the time they reach 2-ish or so years of age. But there's a lot of variability around that. So if you've got a 2.5-year-old and they don't have all 20 teeth yet, don't fret. There are 32 secondary or permanent teeth. They begin erupting around year 6, and we don't get our very last teeth until late in adolescence, somewhere between the ages of 17 and 20, as the wisdom teeth begin to erupt. Naming of the teeth, we have the central incisors. To the lateral surface side of each central incisor is the lateral incisor, sometimes called the first and second incisors. Then is the canine tooth, that's the sharp corner tooth of our mouths. First and second premolar, also called first and second. I started looking, I thought, oh gosh, something's wrong. First and, with where I had my labels coming in. First and second premolar, sometimes called the first and second bicuspid, because they have two biting surfaces here. And then the first, second, and third molar. And this last molar here is the wisdom tooth. Many of us have had our wisdom teeth removed because our jaws, through evolutionary history, have become relatively short compared to our ancestors. And so for many of us, there is not sufficient space along the jaw to accommodate the size of a third molar. And frequently, the molars will come in at an angle. That last molar, the wisdom tooth, will come in at an angle, and it will just wreck the placement of all the other teeth, because it's pushing against those teeth and moving them around as they erupt and fully come in. Functions, the incisors are all about biting and cutting through our food. The canine, imagine a dog now, they will bite down with that canine and will use it to grasp food and rip it out. And so it's a tearing, grasping, and piercing and tearing tooth. And then the premolars and the molars are all about grinding. They have large, relatively flat surfaces that will grind against the upper and the lower premolars and molars, grind against each other and allow us to chew up the plant foods that we eat lots of. When you look at a tooth, the structure of it, so we're looking at a slice through the tooth, anything that is above the gum, above the gingiva, is referred to as the crown. Anything that is below the gingiva and down in the bone, in that down in the bone, is referred to as the root. The crown is covered with this hard white, non-living crystalline material composed of calcium and phosphorus. That's the enamel. Deep to the enamel is a living cellular tissue called dentin. The enamel is there to provide a hard biting and chewing surface and to protect the dentin, to seal it up so that the acids that form in the mouth as we, if we don't brush our teeth immediately, then the food begins to decay in there and it produces metabolic acids. The bacterial action does, and that can erode the enamel and is very detrimental to the dentin. It will kill that cellular material. So this is all living material here, the yellow parts. In the very central portion of the tooth is a pulp cavity. It's got lots of connective tissue, cellular stuff in here, and also is the passageway to bring in fresh new blood with lots of oxygen and minerals in it, and carry away blood that is depleted in those minerals and depleted in oxygen, and also a space for nerves. This should say alveolar process here. So the bone, here's the alveolar process with the tooth embedded in there, and we have protein fibers that make up the periodontal ligament that binds the tooth back to the bone of the alveolar process, as well as cementum, which is the gluey material that's there amongst all those protein fibers making up that periodontal ligament. And notice the spelling, it is periodontal, not just periodontal. So periodontal ligament. And last of all, this space here where the blood vessels and the nerve enter into the tooth is referred to as the root canal. So when someone is having a root canal performed, the top part of the tooth is ground out. We actually drill down and clear out the nerve, the blood vessels, effectively killing the tooth, because now the dentin will not have a supply of nutrients, and then we cover over the whole thing with a crown. So we replace the tooth that's been drilled out with, or replace the crown of it with a new false or fake material crown, either porcelain or metal. So associated then with the mouth are the salivary glands. They secrete saliva, which is a watery fluid. It moistens the food, and the mucuses in it bind the food, get it good and gooey and sticky. And it also begins chemical digestion because we have enzymes in it. And as we are dissolving or moistening the food, taste particles are dissolved in it so that our chemoreceptors in the tongue can begin to taste those materials. Saliva includes salivary amylase. It is an enzyme that will break up complex carbohydrates into simple sugars, and it's produced by the serous cells of the salivary glands. Mucus is produced by the mucus cells of the salivary glands, and mucus is, remember, it is mucin that's been wetted, hydrated, and when it's hydrated it becomes sticky and helps to, again, lubricate and bind the food mass. Here we can see a duct of the salivary glands. Here's the open space, the lumen, through which the saliva is passed. Here are the cells that surround the duct. And here we see in longitudinal section a duct. These are the cells lining the duct here, making an open space, and here are the secretory cells down at the bottom of the duct. And we have three pairs of salivary glands. The parotid salivary glands found here, inferior and anterior to the ears. They are composed primarily of serous glands, so their saliva is very watery with lots of salivary amylase, dumps out at the roof of the mouth. The submandibular, or I guess on the side, yeah. The submandibular salivary glands, they are here underneath or inside the lower jaw. They're at the floor of the mouth, and they have equal numbers of mucus and serous glands, so they produce a somewhat thicker secretion that has a relative amount, because the mucus is in there thickening it, that has a relatively high amount of salivary enzymes, that salivary amylase. And then there beneath the tongue are the sublingual salivary glands, just at the floor of the mouth beneath the tongue. And these produce a secretion that is really thick, stringy, very mucus-y. So We also have minor salivary glands kind of scattered around the cheek, the interior of the cheek, the palate, and the tongue. So a little bit of additional saliva there. What controls the secretion? Well, fight or flight stimulation is going to dry up the mouth. So imagine yourself giving your first public speech, and you get up there and you're all freaked out. Your sympathetic stimulation, your sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system is in full gear. You want to run from the room, get as far away from that as you possibly can, and just in time, your mouth goes extremely dry because sympathetic stimulation yields very little saliva. And the saliva that we do get is very mucousy and sticky, and so your mouth starts to make all those smacky noises and clicky noises, and it's terrible. So always have with you, the thing to remember is that because of this sympathetic stimulation, you should always have with you a glass of water or a water bottle or something so that you can re-moisten the mouth. Parasympathetic stimulation, rest and digest stimulation, is what triggers the release of saliva. And this can be a reflexive reflex. Or reflexive response. You don't even have to have actual food in the room to trigger salivation. So you can see a picture of food, you might smell food, just even thinking about food can cause saliva to be released into the mouth. Okay, so there you have it. We are now getting down the road, and we have gotten our food into the mouth and gotten it well lubricated, so we're now ready to swallow. And that's where we'll pick up when we start the next lecture. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me, so do so.